The river did not care. It carried everything away, without memory, without mercy. And on that day, it carried 2 children. The basket drifted along the swollen waters of the Tiber River, spinning slowly, caught between currents and silence. Inside, 2 infants lay wrapped together, abandoned, condemned, or perhaps spared. No cries echoed across the banks, only the sound of water and wind through the reeds. They should have died there, forgotten, erased before their names ever existed. But the river did not claim them. It delivered them, gently, almost deliberately, to the muddy edge of the wild. And waiting there was something no story should begin with. A wolf. Not a hunter, not a shadow in the trees, but a creature that approached and did not strike. Instead, it lowered its head. And the children lived. From that moment, the line between myth and something darker begins to blur, because these were not ordinary children. They were marked by blood, by fate, by something Rome itself would one day become. Their names were Romulus and Remus, and their story begins with abandonment and ends with blood. Long before Rome became an empire, before its armies marched across continents and its name echoed through history, there was only a story. A story told and retold, shaped by memory, belief, and identity. At its center were 2 brothers, bound together from birth, yet destined to divide the world between them. But to understand their beginning, one must step back into a lineage that was never entirely human. According to Roman tradition, the twins were not born into obscurity. Their bloodline traced back to Aeneas, a survivor of the fall of Troy. Aeneas, guided by fate, had journeyed across the sea to the lands of Italy, where his descendants would one day establish kingdoms. Generations passed, and from this line came a woman named Rhea Silvia. She was a Vestal virgin, sworn to chastity, bound to serve the sacred fire of Rome's future. Her life was meant to be controlled, contained, untouched by the chaos of the world beyond her duty. But the story does not allow for such stillness. Rhea Silvia became pregnant, not through choice, but through divine intervention, as the myth tells it. The father was said to be Mars, a presence that immediately transformed the nature of the children she carried. They were no longer simply human. They were marked by war, by power, by destiny. Yet their birth did not bring celebration. It brought fear. The ruling king, Julius, saw the children as a threat. Their bloodline challenged his authority, their existence a danger to his control. And so, like many stories of power in Rome, the response was simple: eliminate the threat. The infants were taken from their mother. There was no ceremony, no hesitation. Only the quiet decision that their lives should end before they could begin. But even here, the story bends. The servant ordered to carry out the act did not kill them directly, whether from hesitation, fear, or something deeper. He chose another method. He placed them in a basket and set them upon the waters of the Tiber River. It was a slower death, a quieter one, one that placed fate or chance in control. The river carried them through the wild landscape, far from the structures of power that had condemned them. The current slowed. The basket caught against the roots of a fig tree near the base of a hill that would later become central to Rome itself. And there, the unnatural moment occurred. A she-wolf found them. The image is one of the most enduring in Roman mythology. The animal lowering itself beside the children, offering nourishment instead of death. Whether seen as literal or symbolic, the meaning is unmistakable: survival where none should exist. The twins were later discovered by a shepherd named Faustulus. He took them in, raising them alongside his own family. They grew not as princes, not as heirs, but as boys of the land. They learned to hunt, to fight, to endure. Their strength became known among those around them. Even in youth, there was something different about them, something that drew attention. Conflict came early. Disputes with local groups, skirmishes that revealed their ability to lead and to command, and eventually, the truth of their origin surfaced. They were not ordinary shepherd sons. They were descendants of kings. Their birth had been hidden, but not erased. When they learned of their past, the response was not hesitation, it was action. They confronted Julius, the man who had ordered their death, the man who had tried to erase them before they could exist. The confrontation ended as many such stories do, with violence. Julius was overthrown. Order, in a sense, was restored. Their grandfather Numitor was returned to power, for a moment. The story seems to reach a resolution, but it does not end there, because the twins did not remain. They left, drawn back to the place where they had first survived. The banks of the Tiber, the wild ground where the basket had come to rest. It was there that they made a decision to build something new. Not a kingdom inherited, but a city created. A place that would carry their names into the future. But even here, unity did not last. Because creation requires choice. And choice invites conflict. The question arose, where exactly should the city be built? On which hill? Under which sign? What began as discussion shifted into rivalry. Rivalry became tension. Tension moved towards something darker. The bond that had carried them from the river began to strain. Omens were sought. Signs from the gods, birds in the sky, interpreted as messages. Each brother claimed favor. Each believed the future belonged to him, and in that belief, something broke. The moment is described differently in various accounts, but the outcome remains the same. Remus crossed a boundary, whether in mockery, defiance, or challenge. He stepped over the walls his brother had begun to build. It was a gesture, a statement, perhaps even a test. And Romulus responded, not with words, but with action. Remus was killed. By his brother's hand, or by those acting in his name. The first blood of Rome was not foreign. It was not an enemy. It was family, and from that act, the city was born. The city did not rise in peace. It rose from a line drawn in the dirt and crossed in blood. After the death of Remus, there was no turning back. Whatever bond had once existed between the brothers had been severed in a single irreversible moment. And from that moment forward, the city would carry only one name, Rome, named for Romulus. Its first king, its first ruler, its first killer. The act that created Rome was not hidden. It was remembered, repeated, almost accepted as necessary. Because in the logic of the myth, something had to be sacrificed for the city to exist, and that sacrifice was human. Romulus began to build. Walls were raised, boundaries marked. Structures slowly took shape from the raw earth. But a city is not just stone and space, it requires people. And Rome had none, at least not enough. The solution that followed would define the early identity of Rome in ways that echo far beyond myth. Romulus opened the city to outsiders, runaways, exiles, men with no place elsewhere, the unwanted, the forgotten. They came in numbers. Rome became a refuge, but also something more dangerous, a gathering of those who had nothing to lose. But there was a problem. A city of men cannot sustain itself. And so Romulus turned to his neighbors, not with war at first, but with invitation. The nearby Sabines were invited to a festival, a celebration meant to build alliances, to create trust, to present Rome as something more than a rough settlement of outsiders. Families came. Men, women, children. They entered the city without fear, because they believed they were safe. And then, the signal was given. In a single coordinated moment, the Roman men seized the Sabine women. Not randomly, not chaotically, but with purpose. Each man taking one, pulling them away, separating them from their families, from their past, from everything they had known. The event would later be known as the Rape of the Sabine women, a term that, in its original sense, meant abduction. But the reality behind it remains deeply unsettling. It was not an act of desperation alone, it was a decision. A calculated move to ensure the survival of the city. The Sabine men did not forget. They did not forgive. War followed, inevitable. The Sabines returned, not as guests, but as an army. They marched on Rome, determined to reclaim what had been taken and to punish those responsible. The battle that followed was fierce. Close, because this was not a war between distant enemies. It was a war between men connected by what had been done. And then, something unexpected happened. In the middle of the conflict, the women stepped forward. The same women who had been taken. The same women who now stood between two sides. Their former families, and their new lives. They intervened, physically placing themselves between the fighting men, refusing to allow the battle to continue. They spoke not as captives, but as something more complex. They had become part of Rome. Wives, mothers. Their identities no longer belonged to one side alone, and in that moment, the violence stopped. Not because one side had won, but because neither could continue without destroying something of their own. A peace was formed. Not clean, not simple, but real. The Sabines and Romans united. Their people combined. Their futures intertwined. Rome grew, not from purity, not from unity at its origin, but from conflict, from contradiction, from acts that could not be undone, only absorbed. Romulus ruled over this evolving city, shaping its early structure, its institutions, its identity. He established systems of governance, organized the population, and continued to expand Rome's influence. But even his end is uncertain. Some accounts say he vanished, taken by the gods during a storm, raised to divine status. Others suggest something far less mystical, that he was killed, torn apart, not by enemies, but by those within his own ranks. The truth remains unclear, but the pattern feels familiar. Because the story of Romulus does not end with certainty. It ends with absence. Just as it began, Rome was not born gently. It did not emerge from peace or unity or harmony. It began with abandonment, with survival against the odds, with a wolf in the wild, and a river that chose not to take. It grew through conflict, through violence between brothers, through decisions that blurred the line between necessity and cruelty. The death of Remus was not an accident. It was a beginning, a signal of what Rome would become, a city that expanded, that absorbed, that conquered, but always carried something of its origin within it, a memory not of innocence, but of struggle. Even the story itself feels unsettled, part myth, part warning, part reflection of a people trying to understand their own nature. Because to tell this story is to accept something uncomfortable, that greatness can come from darkness, that power can be built on fracture, and that the first act of Rome was not creation, but division, two brothers, one city, and a line that, once crossed, could never be undone.